So many people were taking the time to celebrate her legacy, to talk about all of her achievements, about how she, ascended to the throne when she was 25, I believe. Everybody was kind of celebrating that. Michael Knowles even did a 30-minute post show because he loves the Queen so much and he was getting teary. So this was a significant historical event for people even outside of the UK. She represented an era that we are rapidly seeing slip away, which is an era of tradition and heritage and, like I said, class, and a link to important moments in history. I mean, most people think of her in, some sort of positive light. Most people with normal human decency are going to treat this situation with empathy and respect and think about her legacy.
Every time a historic figure in the West passes away, it seems like it's a chance for a lot of people to dance on that person's grave, not particularly because they hate that person, but because they don't like the West very much. The reality is that when a historic figure like Elizabeth II passes away, it reminds us all that there are some pretty stellar things about Western civilization.
So hello once again from the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Again, I'm going to have to start the video by apologizing. I can hear loads of cars, loads of bikes, and apparently there's also a concert going on because I can hear the bass. If you hear stuff like that, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to enjoy it as a nice ambient backdrop. But the benefit of that is you are still getting great and funny content from your favorite YouTuber. So today we're going to be talking about the Queen a bit more because we have to talk about the Queen. She passed away last week. Now, yesterday, by the time you're seeing this, I uploaded a video basically talking about the insane UK reaction to the Queen's death, because this country, well, I'm talking about the country where I normally live, has gone absolutely insane. So please go check that out. And if you really want to get my unfiltered thoughts on the British monarchy, please go check that out, because I really didn't hold back in talking about how much I don't like the monarchy, including the Queen. But one of my favourite things that I've come to notice over the past couple years is American conservatives both loving the royal family of the UK and loving the British Empire. I love this so much because these people are so patriotic, talk about how great America is all the time, and you'd think the most patriotic of conservatives would really buy into this national myth of America, that your average person in America was so fed up of being oppressed by that tyrant King George that they rose up against the British Empire, overthrew it, to create this democracy that had never been seen in the world, or at least since, I don't know, ancient Athens. America was the successor to the Greek democracy, stuff like that. You'd think they'd buy into this, but no, apparently a load of American conservatives, including Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk, both think the British Empire was a good thing and they love the royal family. These guys also supported Donald Trump, or at least Donald Trump's agenda, and wasn't that called America First? But apparently you guys all want America to be subservient to the same royal family that ruled over you in the 1700s. Of course, America believing it overthrew the British administration of America because it cared about democracy is pretty ridiculous when you look at the larger picture of it's just a bunch of wealthy old white men, many who owned plantations and slaves, just wanted to not pay taxes to a foreign power and control more of their wealth in America, create their own ruling elite there, rather than they cared about the everyday person. And I don't really want to talk about this too much because it would require a bit too much research on my end, but I've made videos about Anglo-Saxon history and why so many Americans think they're Anglo-Saxon. And part of that is believing that America is the successor state to Anglo-Saxon England. And they believe that, for example, King Alfred the Great and all these different Anglo-Saxon kings brought in property rights, brought in this form of religion that they liked. But then it's weird because they also start talking about the Magna Carta and things that came after the Norman invasion. So like with many conservative views of history, it's a very mixed bag. So I don't know how much I'm going to talk about that, but what we're going to do in the video is I'm going to review different clips of conservatives talking about how great the Queen was or the British Empire. And we're going to be talking about Brett Cooper, this fake Gen Z YouTuber who I've covered a bit. We're going to be talking about Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk, and maybe talk about how these two have precedent, because they were also simping for the Queen when everyone was hating on Meghan Markle a year and a half ago. So all of that coming up for you today. Before we go any further, please like the video, and in the comments, please let me know either the most insane reaction to Queen Elizabeth's death that you've seen, And I'm particularly interested in you Americans. What is the craziest thing you've seen from, I guess, patriotic American conservatives in regard to the royal family? I would like to see them. Also, check out my social media at the Kavernacle on Twitter, on Instagram. Also, if you want to support my work continuing for the future, please consider becoming a patron. I'm trying to build up as many $1 to $3 patrons as possible, and you get access to the Discord server and my Nintendo Switch friend code. Also, I'm going to be posting some exclusive content from my travels. Nothing major, but just stuff, about how I'm getting on and how I'm finding living in like a very different culture and stuff like that. So if you care about any of that, please check out the Patreon. Also check out the second channel where I'm just posting random stuff at the moment. It used to be my archive live streams, but now I'm just doing whatever I want. And also check out the subreddit down in the description. So I've pretty much just decided this while I was talking through the intro. I'm actually going to show you the precedent of Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk simping for the Queen. So this is when I first became aware that apparently patriotic conservatives in America really love the royal family, or at least feel like you should curtsy for the Queen and bow down to the Queen. But have a look at a couple of these clips from, I guess, a year and a half ago.
Oh my God. She never realized she was supposed to curtsy before the Queen? So that's, well, what a difficult, how difficult must that have been? To have to curtsy before the Queen of England? My God, how humiliating. Like every other human who curtsies before the Queen of England or bows before the Queen of England? Can't believe it. Just crazy. Crazy stuff. And that's when the penny dropped and she was about to learn of the predations of the royals. And well, by the way, it's not all on Meghan Markle. Harry's the actual villain of this piece. Okay, Harry grew up with these people, and now he's just dumping all over his entire family.
Feels like a safe one. Meghan, you are now allowing your feelings, I guess I should say, to dictate an accusation of a family that largely, by all evidence available, embraced you. What an unbelievably ungrateful person you are. No gratitude. Perfect leftist, no gratitude. He's using it now to go make people feel sorry for her. Now, what bothers me the most about all this is actually not Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. We know Prince Harry is a metrosexual beta male and really is lacking in almost all testosterone. And we know that Meghan Markle is a tradition-destroying leftist who's self-indulgent. We know that. That's not exactly breaking news.
So you think patriotic conservatives wouldn't side with the British royal family over someone who is actually American in Meghan Markle? But obviously that led me to catch on that the reason these guys support the British monarchy is because of racism, pretty much. Obviously it's more stark racism with the Meghan Markle stuff, maybe a bit more subtle racism if you don't understand the history of like the royal family or their role in Britain today, or colonialism for the other clips I'm going to show you. But yeah, it seems the attraction of the modern conservative movement to the British royal family pretty much is racism. And one more thing I do want to note is I love how Charlie Kirk calls Prince Harry metrosexual beta male, because conservatives have this very traditional, understanding of masculinity, right? They love people who are like traditionally masculine. Prince Harry, the guy who loved to party and drink, who did a tour of Afghanistan as an infantry soldier and then went back and did another one as an Apache helicopter pilot. In the American conservative view of masculinity, does it get more masculine than someone who was both an attack helicopter pilot and a soldier in an actual war? Obviously they don't like him because they think he's some sort of leftist, but I do find it funny they're calling him a beta male. Like Charlie Kirk is calling Prince Harry a beta male. It just feels like total projection at this point. But let's move on. My favourite up-and-coming Gen Z YouTuber is Fem Shapiro herself, Brett Cooper, who totally has earned her massive success on YouTube this year. Nothing astroturfed about her account. Nothing about, the millions of dollars put into her channel by the Daily Wire, which have helped her grow. It's all because her content is hilarious. And for a Gen Z YouTuber, her videos do contain a lot of boomer memes all the time. I guess she's trying to appeal to more traditional young conservatives or older people. But basically, she was also very sad. The Queen of England, the royal family that used to own America, passed away. So I'm probably going to show you like 2 clips of Brett Cooper, and I'm going to respond to each one. So let's have a look at the first one.
One of the most heartbreaking things that I saw from all of yesterday was there was a video of all of the royal family's cars literally speeding into Balmoral. But I mean, it just goes to show that when it comes to, the British monarchy, all of these, big figureheads, we think of them as, the Queen, but obviously she was a grandmother, she was a mother. It was just really meaningful to see that in the midst of the chaos that was going on online. A blue check professor from the University of Michigan had some thoughts about the entire event, and she said, telling the colonized how they should feel about their colonizers' health and wellness is like telling my people that we ought to worship the Confederacy. Respect the dead when we're all writing these tweets in English. How'd that happen, We just choose this language? So, encouraging people to have respect and to mourn Queen Elizabeth's death is like forcing black people to worship the Confederacy. Like the hoops that these people intellectually jump through to get to these conclusions is astounding. I mean, they are so driven by these extreme heightened emotions of anger and rage and ideology and fear that they have totally bypassed and forgotten the most basic human emotion of empathy and decency. Like, they are the people that have no logic, no rationality. They're supposed to be the ones that, lead with, their emotion, whatever feels good at the moment. They can't even take a second to mourn.
I think Brett Cooper there really shows a conservative mindset in that she's both accusing left-wing people of having an emotional reaction to the Queen's death and not thinking logically, while at the same time having an emotional reaction to the Queen's death and not thinking logically, because what she's saying there in some parts is a complete contrast to what I said yesterday, in that, yeah, the Queen is a mother, she is a grandmother, a great-grandmother, but when you're a head of state of the UK and the UK state apparatus, you cannot divorce that from being the head of state. Like, when you enter the political arena and do loads of political things and say political things, or become the queen of a whole country, the queen of several countries, or the Commonwealth and stuff like that, you forfeit just the ability to be remembered as someone who was a decent person and a decent grandmother. That's just the way it goes. So telling people that you have to have empathy for the Queen because she might have been a good grandmother is absolutely ridiculous. But then she goes on to say that colonized peoples should feel empathy and mourn for the Queen, or just respect people who are mourning for the Queen. He's saying we're jumping through hoops to get to that conclusion, and clearly someone who's immensely ignorant of the Queen, because although the Queen wasn't like some brutal dictator, she did very much benefit from colonialism. Just look at the jewels that she wears. They're all stolen wealth from various different colonies, and the wealth the monarchy have built up over centuries, which they've inherited from each other, is built on colonial exploitation. As someone from an Irish background, like I said in yesterday's video, Irish family who died fighting the British Empire for freedom and stuff like that. Don't you Americans love freedom? People like the Queen oversaw a brutal regime which saw Ireland's population decrease because of the famine, which they deliberately engineered, to a level that has never recovered. So Americans like Brett Cooper, maybe ask yourselves why there are so many Irish people in America. It's not because most of them fancied leaving Ireland for freedom in America. It's because most of them were forced out because they were starving, because this deliberate capitalist policy of these laissez-faire economics that the British Empire decided to enact on Ireland, especially the Catholic population, which were oppressed by the Protestant Irish and Scottish and the English. I'm sorry we're not going to feel particularly sad about the monarch and her family, who benefited so much from this colonialism and was actually queen when Irish people were still fighting their colonialism. If she was such a great person, maybe she would call on, I don't know, the British government, let her territory of Northern Ireland become rightfully part of Ireland again. And Brett Cooper, there are loads of countries in the Commonwealth who have the Queen as the head of state who have just as bad histories of Ireland with the monarchy, and that's why they don't want to mourn the Queen. That's why they don't want to show respect. Although she may have been more of a figurehead than other monarchs, she still had immense privilege and benefited off us, UK taxpayers, in her whole life. So we aren't sad, Brett Cooper. And I think actually, if you were in the UK and you're a young person and maybe you understood things, maybe you wouldn't be a conservative in the first place, I think you'd understand our anger. And if you had a background from a family who were colonised by the British Empire, ruled by the royal family that is still in power today, maybe you would understand that we're not jumping through hoops to hate the Queen. She pretty much is a beneficiary of colonialism that dehumanized our ancestors. Just because Britain owning America was like back in the late 1700s doesn't mean that was the reality for most colonized people. There are still places in the world today, like Northern Ireland, which are occupied by the British state, headed by the Queen and now the King. That's why we don't want to mourn her, and that's why we don't like her. And just because Brett Cooper seems to exhibit some of the worst of American brain, she reads a tweet who I think is from a British person talking about Republicans in the UK, meaning people who want a republic rather than a constitutional monarchy, and she doesn't seem to understand that this person isn't actually talking about American Republicans. Of course, just like many American conservatives, wants to insert their own ideology into every conversation, even when it has nothing to do with them. Also reminds me of that meme about American Republicans meeting Irish Republicans. So have a look at this clip quick.
Another person tweeted out something that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, I agree with, but she obviously had to put a punch in there for her awful conservatives. But she said, I don't care if you are a Republican or you despise the royal family. To make vulgar comments about the Queen's ill health is totally inappropriate. I absolutely agree. And I'm not sure if this person is saying she doesn't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat or whatever, or if she is saying, like, you awful Republicans, pipe down because I know you're terrible. I'm not exactly sure what her point is, but if it is the latter, the people who have given the most disrespect to the Queen, who have made those vulgar comments, are not Republicans. All the tweets that I read above, those are leftists.
That obviously makes me laugh, and that she tries to maybe not agree with the tweet in case it's actually saying Republicans are bad. But the tweet is actually referencing like actual British Republicans, you know, people who don't want to be simps to an unelected monarchy that believes it was chosen by God to rule over us peasants. Again, Brett Cooper, clearly ignorant, brainwashed, loves the Queen for some strange reason. And what I love about these videos that conservatives make about why the Queen was good, they literally cannot list any reasons why the Queen was good. Just like actually royalists here who try and say, oh, she led with dignity and respect and she was a great symbol for the country. Okay, what has she actually done? What has she actually done? Anyone? Can anyone in the comments please tell me one thing the Queen did that was good? So now we're transitioning a bit more into American conservatives simping for the British Empire as well, but we're going back to Ben Shapiro, who seems to be one of the biggest simps for the royal family. So basically he did this video talking about the Queen's life and just about how great it was and all that stuff. And again, another person who can't seem to give me any reasons why the Queen was good, just like many people, just outlining how she lived through a historical time period, and she was the head of state during this tumultuous period in the UK, but didn't actually do anything. And that seems to be the typical remembrance of her legacy, that she oversaw this changing period in the UK. So let's have a look at a couple clips of Ben Shapiro. Let's have a look at a couple clips of Ben Shapiro and also him talking about how the British Empire, although flawed, was actually a good thing.
The thing that made Elizabeth II a unique figure in world history is not only her tenure. I mean, she presided over the British Empire for 70 years in symbolic fashion, right? Because that was her job. She didn't actually have political power. She was a person who was expected to be a symbol of British unity, which meant really a symbol of Western civilization. The fact that she presided over the dissolution of the British Empire, the fact that she presided over all of these radical changes that happened in British society, but always held fast to certain principles, both religious and secular, that characterized British society, her death is going to leave a lasting imprint on Britain, because now we've moved into a new era in the West in which you are not expected to perform your duty, in which you are not expected to represent, say, Judeo-Christian values to your nation, in which the symbolism of having a person who unites the realm, that sort of thing is seen as passé. Instead, we are just an agglomeration of various folks who have been sort of thrust together by the vicissitudes of history. Queen Elizabeth II represented a rebuttal to that. That's what her life was about. So it came in a couple forms. One was okay, well, she's a queen, who cares? Whatever. You know, we're American. We fought the crown just so we wouldn't have to care about stuff like this. Okay, I get it. The reality is that the monarchy of Britain right now is not anything remotely resembling the monarchy of Britain in the time of King George III. She had no political power. But the truth is that apparently people have a need for royalty. In the United States, we've supplanted the idea of a symbolic leader who's like Queen Elizabeth II. We've supplanted that with a celebrity culture that is filled with babbling idiots who repeat whatever lines are put in front of them and apparently take their cultural cues and political cues from other television writers. And those are our royalty. Over here, our royalty is like Kim Kardashian and Jennifer Lawrence.
Of course, he's talking about the Queen as like some conservative figure, someone who was both great for religious and secular things, someone who supported Judeo-Christian values, you know, that weird phrase these people like to throw around in conservative circles in England and the UK. I do like at the end where he starts talking about how, you know, we're American and we're meant to hate the British Empire and hate the crown and stuff. But Queen Elizabeth, she's not like that. She's not like King George III. She's not like old monarchs. She didn't have much power. No power at all. So therefore we should like her. Americans, you tell me, are you told that America would have been better as a constitutional monarchy if the monarch just acted like, I don't know, Queen Elizabeth II does today? I don't think Americans would tolerate that. I don't think most Americans want a queen. I don't think most Americans want a monarch, but it seems Ben Shapiro very much does want a monarch, and he feels like, well, in the US, we have our monarchs. We have these reality TV stars and TV show writers. Ironic considering he's actually a failed TV screenwriter. And also, you had a president who was a reality TV show host, and you had another president who was a movie actor, and you love both these people, or at the very least support the agenda of Donald Trump, and you're talking about how the kings and queens of America are people like Kim Kardashian. No irony there, but you have supported people who are very much like Kim Kardashian, way more than they are actually like Queen Elizabeth, I'd say. But again, more conservative simping, which is just like vague praise for, I guess, her values or something. Like, Americans really care about the Queen's values. But now I want to move on to Ben Shapiro basically praising the British Empire. So him and Charlie Kirk both do this, and this makes me laugh even more because, of course, didn't the Americans fight the British Empire? Didn't you win this glorious revolutionary war against the British Empire so you could live freely and live the way you wanted to? So if you buy into that national myth, how can you not understand that so many other people wanted to live freely too? Irish people. Ho Chi Minh literally quoted the Declaration of Independence on the day that he announced Vietnamese independence in 1945 after World War II. And he said to American CIA, or OSS back in the day, that our struggle was like your struggle, right? So if colonized people around the world are comparing themselves to the American revolutionaries, you'd think American patriotic conservatives would also feel that way. Although I would say it's not the same context, you at least think if they bought into this myth, they would feel this way. Well, not Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk. They think the British Empire was a good thing. So let's have a look at both these clips and break it down.
About how British colonialism actually made the world decent, separation of powers, habeas corpus, freedom of speech, individual property rights, the respect and the dignity of the individual. Where did all those come from? The Magna Carta, the great thinkers of Edmund Burke to Shakespeare. Why is it that the world actually became more civil? Well, certain cultures are better than others. Saying that out loud is a thought crime. British colonialism was the most benign global empire ever, and it's kind of sparked this conversation after the tragic and incredibly unfortunate death of Queen Elizabeth, who was, by all accounts, an incredibly stoic and wise woman who loved her country, was also a devout woman of faith. And something that I'm very concerned about is that her death is only going to continue the secularization of Great Britain.
The other form that the backlash to her took was the British Empire was bad, and she was bad because the British Empire was bad. Understand that the folks who are saying this are people who are generally historically ignorant, or people who fail the easy test of understanding context, people who seem to believe that the evils of the West are unique, but that its goods are universal, which is precisely the opposite of the truth. The opposite of the truth is that the evils that the British Empire visited upon the world, which were not insignificant, they're very real to literally millions of human beings, were accompanied by goods that were extraordinarily unique to billions of people around the world. What distinguished the British Empire from, say, the Russian Empire? What distinguished the British Empire from the other empires on earth that were competing with the British Empire? And there, you have to say that the overwhelming legacy of the British Empire is good. And I know these are difficult words for people to hear. This does not mean that colonialism overall is a good. It does not mean there are no costs to colonialism. It does not mean that countries should seek colonies. It does not mean it was a good thing for Great Britain to have started implanting forms of government and that were in many cases discriminatory and terrible in places like Africa. It does mean that if you're going to rip on the British Empire wholeheartedly, then you at least ought to acknowledge some of the benefits of the British Empire.
So in those clips, I think there's two kind of mindsets going on. I think Charlie Kirk fully believes in what he's saying, where Ben Shapiro, I guess, does believe it to an extent, but he's trying to be a bit of contrarian as well and basically be like, oh, I'm giving the hot take. The British Empire was a good thing, but I'll admit all the bad things it does as well, but overall it was a good thing. Also, I do find it funny that he makes the caveat of saying that, you know, the British colonized Africa and set up discriminatory governments there, right? Two of those governments were apartheid Rhodesia, which would eventually become independent apartheid Rhodesia, and apartheid South Africa, which of course would be independent apartheid South Africa as well. And people who fought South African apartheid said it was very much like Israeli apartheid. So Ben Shapiro doesn't have problems in supporting Israeli apartheid. He tries to make the caveat of, yeah, British doing apartheid was bad, but I actually support Israeli apartheid. I just found that pretty interesting. But also in Ben Shapiro's clip, he doesn't really seem to give many good reasons why colonialism was good. In my mind, the argument he made there just makes it sound bad overall. And he's basically saying, you know, it gave us some things, doesn't elaborate too much. So either very, very poor argument, or he's just trying to be a contrarian, but doesn't really believe it. But I found the Charlie Kirk thing a bit more interesting. Calling the British Empire benign and like a positive force that gave us like habeas corpus, free speech, the Magna Carta, which these people probably couldn't even define at all. But yeah, let's unpack the benign things. So this is something Ben Shapiro has kind of said as well, is that the British Empire has kind of got an unfair reputation, and Charlie Kirk calling it benign is obviously hilarious. I've already spoke a bit about the Irish stuff, and obviously coming from an Irish background, the British Empire was not benign, like I said. The Irish population still has not recovered from something the British Empire did to it in the 1840s. But there's lots more, way more recent stuff. Brutal crackdowns on protests and revolutions in Iraq in the 1920s, in Kenya in the 1950s, in Malaya in the 1950s, in places like Egypt, in places like Yemen and Oman and all these different colonies, the British Empire brutally killed millions of people during Elizabeth's reign, and that's something to remember. In the period of 1952 to 2022, the British Empire, in the Queen's name, killed so many people, and that's something we shouldn't forget. They killed them for colonialism, for British power, for British wealth, for anti-communism, for capitalism, all these things. They did it in her name. If she was such a great person, if she was such a moral person, why didn't she abdicate? Why didn't she stand down? Or why didn't she say it was wrong and let all these colonies get their freedom without having to fight armed resistance in many cases? The British government conceding some colonies peacefully while brutally fighting other uprisings doesn't somehow make the Queen's legacy good. And that is just the British Empire in like the 20th century. We can go further back. Absolutely terrible. One of the worst empires to ever exist because of its reach and how many people it killed throughout its history. And then also Charlie Kirk said something interesting in that, you know, some cultures are better than others, and he talks about like the British Empire. And I always love this sentiment because so many Arab caliphates in like the 800s were so much more advanced than like European Christian backwaters, like England, for example. And actually the new Assassin's Creed is set in Baghdad in the 800s, and Baghdad had these like enormous libraries like your average person could go to read, and like vast sums of knowledge, in complete contrast to Anglo-Saxon England. Again, Western chauvinists do not have good understandings of history. That's how they have the balls to call the British Empire benign. And that would be an insane statement for a British person to make, but for American patriotic conservatives to talk like this just makes me laugh so much. Like, how many Americans did the British Empire kill? And then you're telling me the British Empire was benign. They literally killed your ancestors for colonialism. And it's clear the only reason they like the British Empire now and they like the Queen is because of racism. So yeah, American patriotic conservatives simping for Queen Elizabeth and simping for the British Empire by extension is absolutely hilarious. Now, if you want to check out my thoughts on the royal family, the monarchy, all that stuff, please check out yesterday's video. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.